What a sweet spirit. It's it's kind of ironic to sing a song before I start. I am a little nervous, but it's always nice to get back to worship to ground you, you know. So worship is definitely in my heart. That is what I use, you know, to get through tough times. I'm gonna get into that a little bit today. But anyways, first I just want to say thank you all to everybody who showed up today. It's such an honor to be behind this pulpit that my dad and my mom have blessed us many sermons. It makes me emotional, but I'm so grateful to be here. Thank you guys so much for listening. I hope you can hear my heart in this. So I kind of want to piggyback on my mom's intro. A crazy birth story. I mean, it started even before me, when my sister was born. She was premature, and she had a lot of struggles, and, you know, that was a really traumatic experience for my mom. And God bless my mom. She always wanted a Hannah. She had 3 girls. She never got a Hannah. But Johanna, that's her Hannah. That's you know, her granddaughter. So she wanted a Hannah, and she never got one. But you know, she thought 3rd time's a charm. You know, here comes Miss Hannah. But God had different plans. Like I was saying, my sister Abigail and her birth story was pretty traumatic for my mom. And then as she was going into labor with me, I remember she tells me, you know, I was born during a blizzard in January, so the weather was crazy outside. And, you know, for a week, my mom had to be put on medicine to try to keep me in because, you know, I was eager to make it out into the world. And so as I was getting ready to be pushed out into the world, you know, my vitals started to drop, and my mom already touched on this a little bit, but you know, that fear starts to creep back in. You know, when you've been through trauma, you've been through different seasons of life, and when something goes off that kind of triggers you, those fears start coming back. Even though my mom, in Abigail's story, they already broke through, right? But that's the devil. When something starts to go wrong, he starts to bring up the bad memories. And so you know, the fear kind of crept back in, and God had to just be like, you know what, no. You know, this isn't going to happen again. We're not going to have another traumatic story to tell, but instead it's going to be a victorious one. And I'm just so thankful that that's my name, because I really feel like that I've carried that throughout my life. And I didn't really notice until this recent season of my life, how much that would actually mean to me. But how many know that God names you and ordains you, and we are all victorious, you know, when God is on our side. And so, you know, I was destined for victory. But, you know, growing up, I had a great time. You know, I was the 4th sibling, so I got to watch my older siblings make mistakes, and I was like, nope, I'm not going there. I'm not going to do that. You know, I tried to stay out of trouble, and, you know, I learned a lot from my older siblings. And, you know, I kind of shared a little bit of a testimony with my mom. You know, she was Miss Mary Poppins, as she likes to joke. Practically perfect in every way. You know, I made the good grades. I was on the cheer team. You know, I had the friends. I had the scholarships. You know, high school was a good time for me. And you know, growing up, watching, you know, my siblings struggle, my parents struggle, of course, you know, I felt that, you know, being a part of the family, but I never really had a, quote, testimony of my own. And I remember growing up in ministry, I was like a little jealous. I was like, where's my testimony? What's my testimony gonna be? And, you know, you never wanna be jealous of what someone else has gone through, but, you know, I was born in the ministry, and I know how powerful someone's testimony is. And so I was like easing through life, you know, and I saw other people struggle, but I never really encountered my own struggle. But God, how many of you know that God will just tell you to keep on living? You will find a testimony, a season of struggle. And so I definitely did. But, you know, in high school, it was nice. It was fun. I relied on a lot of my parents' foundation. You know, growing up in church, I'm so grateful for the background and the foundation that I was raised on. But it wasn't until I went off to college that I had to rely on my own foundation. I couldn't rely on mom and dad anymore. I had to grow that sense of independence. And with that came a lot of struggles for me. And so I don't know if you're a mess or a title person, but I'm going to be talking today about facing giants. Another fun backstory. When I was, still in the womb, I always had my legs crossed, so my parents didn't really know if I was going to be a boy or a girl for a minute there, and so they were going to name me David if I was a boy, and it is pretty ironic that David is one of my favorite Bible characters and somebody that I really relate to. So I'm going to be talking about David today, and I'm going to be talking about my 5 giants. So after graduating high school, I got a scholarship. I went to UK. The doors were wide open. I was ready to make my mark, take on everything that it meant to be, a college student. I was very eager. I did really well in high school. So when I got to college, I was originally planning on majoring in chemical engineering. That lasted 2 years before I changed my major. It was really tough. I was humbled, to say the least. When you're in high school and when you're in your parents' home, you're pretty sheltered, and then you get out into the real world and you have to make your own decisions. You have to do your own studying. You have to remind yourself, okay, I have this paper due. I gotta get on that. And so, I did have struggles with that, and then also navigating the social world. I joined a sorority, I made friends. My second semester, I met a man, and we then dated for 3 years. So, I had a relationship, I had friends. But these relationships weren't what I needed. They were impure, they weren't of God. And that really affected me, not necessarily in the moment, but now looking back, I can see how that, it could have been better if I sought out, godly friends and done these things. And I didn't have mom to pray away the bad people in my life. How many of you know that prayer actually works? If somebody just walks up out of your life, you either prayed for it or somebody else did. So, I made friends. And they weren't bad people at all, by no means. They were good. I got stuff out of the relationships, but they were of the world, and God loves everybody. God loves those that are of the world, but they weren't elevating me in my spirituality. They weren't leading me closer to God. And so I knew that, those weren't the people I was supposed to be with, but, nonetheless, I spent, 4 years with these people, and, I did have a good time, but ultimately, I paid the price in the end. When you are around people that you're not supposed to be around, you end up mimicking their behavior. You do what they do. So when things got hard, I fell into bad habits. I started smoking weed. I would go partying. I would, enjoy sexual relationships and do all the worldly things and do all the things that college students do. And so that was my crutch. And instead of relying on my harp, like David used, instead of relying on worship, instead of relying on prayer, instead of going back to the basics, I was rolling up in my apartment. I was waiting to get that next hit, that next high, and it turned into it was a domino effect. The relationships led to bad habits, which led to, the 4 other giants that I'll be talking about today. But with the impure relationships, that is, the first giant that I faced. I didn't really defeat them until after I left college. But, I was trying to fit in. I was trying to navigate my new independence. Moving to college, moving away from home is very hard. Acclimating is hard. You have new rules. You make your own rules. And so you don't have to ask for permission from mom and dad. I wasn't required to go to church every Sunday, Wednesday, Saturday, that I had to growing up. If there was a service, we were there. But I'm so grateful for that experience and that foundation. I wouldn't be here today if it wasn't for my parents and what they have put into my life. So I really am grateful for that. But these impure relationships, I did what they did, and I diminished my witness that way. Even when you are in your flesh, you still have God's gifts in you. You still have that person that he called you to be inside of you, and that would come out in my relationships, and I would be like, well, I'm not as bad as them. I don't do all the things that they do. I'm not doing those drugs. I'm just smoking a joint every now and then. Like, what's so bad about that? But I diminish my behavior and my witness, and relationships can really make or break you. And then this last season of my life, I'll get more into that in a little bit, but I didn't have relationships that stood the test of time. I don't talk to one person that I met in high school or that I met in college, and that's really hard. But I didn't have the foundation set on the things of God. They were set on the ways of the world, and we know that the things of this world are temporary. And if we're not rooted in this, we're not going to make it. And that was the same with those relationships. So I kind of want to talk about David, but just like the right or the wrong relationship will break you, the right relationship will protect you from the enemy. And I kind of want to go into David's journey a little bit and fleeing from Saul. The scripture is in 1 Samuel 21 through 42. I won't really read in all of that, but like I said, just like bad relationships can lead you astray, God will put the right people in place to protect you. And it's really interesting. Jonathan was the son of Saul, who also happened to be the king of the time. And Jonathan and David, I don't know what prompted them to be so close, but they just hit it off. They made a covenant. They were blood brothers. They were loyal to each other. And it's really interesting that Jonathan in that time was more loyal to David and then to his father, who was also the king. And so when Saul sought out to destroy David, to get him killed because, he was called of God. How many know if you're called of God, you're going to have some haters in your life? And so David had some haters. He had experienced a lot of victories. He defeated the lions, the bears, the Goliaths. And so he had a lot riding on his name. And so Saul was out to get him. Saul was after that. And but God placed Jonathan in his life to, kind of protect him. And it was a loyalty until death. Not even, his own blood could break that loyalty, not the loyalty to his father. And I just want to say that if God has you called, there's no weapon, there's no person, there's no plan of the enemy that will prosper. God is going to put people and things in your life that are going to keep you from the tools of the devil. And so that was my first giant impure relationships. And then going into my next giant that I experienced going and being in college, kind of touch on this a little bit, but addiction, vices. When you're around bad company, you fall into their habits. You use their vices to comfort you. I talked about this a little bit. Alcohol wasn't really my thing. I didn't like how it made me feel. I only had to be hungover once to be like, I don't want to do this every weekend. But weed was my thing. You could say I was a functional stoner. I justified it though because. Yeah, yeah, sorry, Mom. But anyways, if anyone needs me to roll their joints, I got you. No, I'm kidding. Thank you, Tizza, for opening up and being so raw and honest. I feel like I can say what I need to say, so I appreciate it. So anyways, I was a stoner. I would still do my schoolwork. I would still go to work. It wouldn't really affect, my interactions with people. It was easy to be functional. But the thing is, I wasn't really functional though. I was still able to go through my day and to do all the things that I needed to do. I, got my papers in on time. I did my assignments. I went to class. I went to work. But I wasn't functional at all. I got to the point to where I couldn't eat unless I smoked. I couldn't get through the day unless I smoked. I couldn't sleep unless I, hit the bowl before I went to bed. And it wasn't functional at all. And it was it was really hard to get through each day without looking forward to, oh, I can't wait to smoke today. And so it's interesting because even though I was called of God, I had the background that I had. I'm a preacher's kid, I still have the same temptation that everybody does. I may be called of God, but that doesn't mean my flesh likes to come out and try to operate myself through that. And so David, I find a lot of comfort in David's story because God still used him, even though he did fall short and he did operate through his flesh. And so I just want to encourage you today, there's no conviction, if you've made a mistake or if you've let your flesh win. I've had all the foundation and the upbringing in the world to keep me from that, and I still made mistakes, So there's no condemnation at all. If you made mistakes, if you sin today, it doesn't matter. God has still called you. You're still going to be able to be used by him. So I just kind of find encouragement in David's story like I have. David's addiction might not have been weed, but it was women, as we know. In 2 Samuel 11:15, he even sent a man to the forefront of a battle to die because of a woman. We know the story of the woman bathing on the rooftop that David saw, and he got what he wanted. He wanted her, and he got her, and she became pregnant. And to hide his sin, he killed somebody for it. He sent his husband away, or her husband away. To battle. So 2 Samuel 11:15, set Uriah in the forefront of the hottest battle and retreat from him so that he may die. Not only did he send him into battle, he wanted nobody to be by his side when he died. He wanted him to end, his life. And just so that he could hide his sin and hide getting another, man's wife pregnant. So David did a lot to feed his flesh. So what would you do to feed your flesh? How far would you go? I mean, hopefully you're not going to go out and murder somebody to get what you want. But, back in those times, he was king. He could do what he wanted. He had that authority. What would you do to feel good? It's funny because before he even saw Bathsheba, David had 7 wives. He had a lot of women. And he still saw something. He was like, oh, that's not enough. I want her too. But the thing is, the things that appeal to our flesh distract us from what's really important, and that can lead to complacency, which is kind of my next giant that I'm going to go into. So complacency, the definition of complacency is self-satisfaction, especially when accompanied by unawareness of actual dangers or deficiencies. And so going into, my bad habits, if you know anybody that has smoked weed or, been a stoner in their life, it's a mellowing drug. It brings you down. You want to just lay around. You get the munchies. You don't want to do anything but just sit and binge Netflix. So that definitely played a role into that. But there came a point, and I think it really started after my first year in college. Like I said, going into college, I was a 4.0 student. I got a lot of scholarships. And then, my first year in college, I was very humbled. I don't know why. I was overzealous, and I decided to take 19 credit hours my first semester in chemical engineering and try to join a sorority. But needless to say, I was humbled. I had a really hard time. I didn't acquire the study skills and the skill set that I really needed from high school to go into college. I wasn't prepared at all. But I had a lot of confidence, kind of like David did, back in the day. I had a lot of confidence, but it dried up really quickly. And so I got my first C. I had to withdraw from, my first semester. I had to withdraw from calculus. So I have a W on my transcript. I got C's. And, at the time, I was really disappointed in myself. But then I was like, you know what? I kind of excused it. I was like, it's hard. It's way harder. It's okay. Like, it's okay to not do as good as you once did. And I got complacent. I got satisfied with just passing by. I made the excuse of, I'm in chemical engineering. Like, are you kidding? It's okay to get C's. C's get degrees, am I right? And so I had no drive in my life to do better. I just did what I needed to get by. I didn't pride myself on being a better person. The straight A high school student was satisfied with getting C's in college. And like I said, smoking made it worse, but also I deflected a lot. Like I said earlier, the gifts that God has put in you since birth will stay with you, even if you are turning your back on him. And one of those gifts that I have is growing up in ministry is service and helping others. I deflected a lot of my own struggles, and I used helping others, being the Dr. Phil of my friendships, being the mom of the friend group. That was my title. I helped others, and I was a good therapist, so to speak. And I had a lot of wisdom because growing up, this was what we used. And even though being in the ways of the world, this is still applicable. All the seeds that were placed in my life, the foundation, this was what I used to help people, but it was a deflection tactic. I felt fulfilled in that, and that was a way for me to kind of be in my ministry, even though I wasn't in ministry anymore. But it was a way for me to feel still used by God by helping other people. So I did. But in helping other people, I got really burnt out. I got weary, and that it was a domino effect that just led into everything else. And so David had some complacency as well. In 2 Samuel, chapter 11, verse 1 through 2, the first verse talks about, at the time when kings go to battle, David remained at Jerusalem. So it's not really customary for kings to stay at home when it's time to go to battle, but I'm not really sure why. I didn't really get into the history of why David stayed, but he was king, so he could decide, if he wanted to stay or not. So he got comfortable in his position. He got comfortable in his authority. He didn't think that he was needed. As a king, let me stay back and let me let the warriors do their thing. I'm going to do my thing. And it's funny, because the second verse, after he didn't do what was, commanded of the kings to do, the second verse goes into, and from the roof he saw a woman bathing. And it's ironic because in seasons of complacency, the devil will use appealing things to keep you there, aka drugs, relationships, Bathsheba on the rooftop, status. The devil is okay if you don't go forward. He's okay if you're plateaued. He's okay if your ministry isn't going up, if you don't witness to somebody today. He's okay if you love God, as long as you're not doing what God's called you to do, that's okay, You're not making an impact, you're being complacent. And so the devil will use appealing things to keep you there in those seasons of complacency, because he knows if you're not complacent, you can do what he's called you to do. You can make moves. You can make an impact on others. And so had David went to battle, I don't know if he would have met Bathsheba elsewhere, if he would have saw her bathing another night. But had David went to battle, as kings of the time were customary to do so, he would have never seen her bathing on the roof that night. He would have been doing what he was called to do. He might not have been tempted with another man's wife. When you are not where God has called you to be, you will do things that you shouldn't be doing. And I definitely did that. David did that. It's a very dangerous place to be, complacency. And that kind of led into my fourth giant, lack of self-esteem, insecurities. I know a lot of us as women, we deal with these on a daily basis. Do I look good in this? Is my hair good enough today? Is my makeup on point? And those are just outward things, but we deal with inward things too. Am I good enough? Am I deserving of what God has for me? There's a lot that goes into that. So doing things that are outside of my character made me unrecognizable to myself. It turned into a cycle of regret, disappointment, disgust in myself. And that it all stemmed down from the first giant, impure relationships, which led to my addiction, which led to complacency, and then this led to my insecurities. I would say at the time that my insecurities were at its all-time high. I had just gotten out of a relationship that I'd been in for 3 years. This was a man that I thought that I was going to marry. He could do no wrong in my eyes. But he did wrong me, mentally, emotionally. It was a bad situation, and kind of like Tizza had said, I loved the man. I was able to overlook the red flags and to get by the little things that hurt, because I loved him. And I saw the potential of a thing. I wasn't taking what was happening at face value. I was just thinking, oh, it'll get better. It can be good. And so once I went through that breakup, it was at a very low point. I was in this relationship for 3 years. I didn't even hardly hang out with friends during that time. I was so engulfed in this man, in this relationship. I thought that was my future. And so I put a lot of who I was in his validation of myself. And, when that came to an end, it was like, who am I? Like, why am I not good enough? What did I do wrong? Because I was using him to validate me. And I started believing the lies of other people and the things that they said about me. I was either not enough or I was too much. There was no, oh, you're just right. It wasn't Goldilocks in the Three Bears for me. It was too much or not enough. And this is when I kind of doubled down on my vices and I made more mistakes. Hurt people. And it was a very low point in my life. The devil took away my confidence. And that is very hard because I've always been an outgoing person. Growing up with my mom, I would always be at the church at 5 years old. I went on my first mission trip. We went to Louisiana when Hurricane Katrina hit. I did a little dance at 5. I had no fear. I jumped in the pool when I was 2. Watching my older siblings do it, I followed their lead. And, I had all the confidence in the world growing up. And that was stripped from me. And it's very hard. It's very hard to make it through. And it's very hard to not feel condemned, especially a person in my position that grew up the way that I grew up. I knew the things that I needed to be doing. I knew how I could be helped. I knew what God had called me to do. And so just being in that place, it just felt even worse because I was like, man, you should do better. Your grades should be better. Your witness should be better. You should go to church more. You should pray more. You should read more. And so I felt that condemnation. And it just really kind of cycled back oh, this is all my fault. I'm the reason for everything that has been happening in my life. And that just led to a lot of insecurity, self-doubt, lack of self-esteem. But David had some insecurities too. 1 Samuel 22 and verse 1. This is the part of the scripture after Saul had a plan to kill David. So he ran and he went into hiding. David departed from there and escaped to the cave. Like I said earlier, when you are marked for greatness, you will have haters. You will have people that are trying to stop you and stop your plan of God on your life. David was in fear of his life, and rightfully so. Saul wanted him dead. He was the king. He had power. He ran from his calling because he was worried that he would die. David had a reputation. He had just defeated Goliath and the Philistines. People knew that he was anointed to be the next king. Saul didn't like what he was hearing. And so word was getting out, and he wanted David dead. But it's kind of ironic that he even went to the cave in the first place because, previously in the book of Samuel, he was called out of Jesse's sons to be king. He was anointed to be king. So it doesn't matter that Saul wanted him dead. It doesn't matter the things that he did that were wrong. It doesn't matter if he had to face Goliath or his 4 brothers. It doesn't matter because God had ordained and called him to be king. So why is he running if God already had a plan and a mark on his life? But we do that. We get in fear, and we run away from the things that God has called us to do and who God has called us to be because we are scared. And that's normal. That's human nature. So even though God had already anointed him to be king, he still ran and he isolated himself. Those fears of the old lies started to creep in. Back in the days of Goliath, you're too small to defeat Goliath. You're too young. Who is your God? You're too much. You're not enough. This armor doesn't fit. You don't have the sword. You don't have the tools to defeat Goliath, to defeat your giants. And so, when you have all the confidence in the world, it's easy to be like, who cares what anybody thinks? But when you're at a low point, when you are feeling those insecurities and, you have that lack of self-esteem, you're more susceptible to believe the lies of the enemy. And the devil is going to get into your mind when you are at a low point, and he's going to keep pressing that thing that triggers you. And so it's very important to stay in the Word, even when you are struggling, even when you don't feel good enough. This is why we're good enough. Jesus is why we're good enough. And that, at the end of the day, is the story that you need to believe. But even when you are called, like David, you can still get in your head and get in your own way and be insecure. And all of this is leading to my fifth and the hardest giant that I've ever faced in my life. It was a domino effect. Everything came boiling back to this moment. The fifth giant being depression. Anyways, so, I graduated college. I'm very proud. I got a degree in human health sciences. Despite everything that I've been through, I was able to get good grades my second 2 years of college. I got that degree. I got what I went there for. But there were some things that I left without, and that was friends. I lost my independence, my lack of responsibilities. I was just thrown out into the real world, and it's like, okay, now what? And what's next? So I had no forward momentum moving back from college. My goal is, and still is, to apply to PA school. I applied this last cycle. I was waitlisted, and it's like, oh, there's that lie. You're not good enough. You're okay, but you're not good enough, to get a spot. So that happened. Friendships ended. I had no one to talk to. I was very isolated. No forward momentum. Feeling I'm not good enough. I just did what I had to get by. I got a job because I was so in debt. I had racked my credit cards up the last couple months, because financially it wasn't a good situation for me either. But thankfully, I had my parents' support, my dad's support. I was never left without, so I'm very thankful for that. But I became depressed, and I isolated myself from others. I would lay in bed all day if I didn't have to work. That was my safety, my bed. I had to move back in with my parents. God love them. I love my parents. I'm so thankful. But when you live by yourself in an apartment and then you have to move back in with your parents, it's like, here I am, an adult, still having to rely on my parents. So that was hard. I slept my days away. Thank you. I didn't talk to anybody. If you texted me back then, you might have gotten a response in a week. I didn't feel like talking to anybody. I made myself sparse. I got back into unhealthy habits, unhealthy vices, ways to just make it through the day. It's very hard. And I used to be one of those people that I was like, depression, it's a state of mind. You can change how you think. You can get out of that. I didn't really believe it was a real thing. But little did I know it is very real. And if you are struggling with depression, you can get hope and you can be freed from that like I was. And I'm so grateful that I was. And so that was my lowest point. I remember having many conversations with my mom. She used to be like, why don't you talk anymore? Why don't you laugh anymore? Why don't you make jokes? Like, where is my daughter? But it was hard. They definitely saw a change in pace in who I was because That wasn't who I am. I'm the outgoing one. I'm the happy-go-lucky. I like to make jokes. I like to do things and to be happy and to talk to people. Like, I'm so extroverted like my mom. I'm gifted in that way. You know, I talk to new people. I meet new people at work all the time. And so it wasn't who I was. There was a point where my mom asked if I needed to go to the doctor, if I needed to get on medicine, because it was so bad. I'm grateful that I didn't have to. I'm grateful that God intervened when he did. And, you know, I was just at a place I couldn't see the light at the end of the tunnel. There wasn't anything moving me forward. And the transition season is very hard for anybody. When you have to wait on God's answer, you have to wait on the direction from the Lord. You have to wait on open doors. It's not easy when you are waiting to accept the no's or to accept the closed doors and not think that it's my fault, that I'm not good enough. And so it was very hard. And it was just like this domino effect. Everything just kept happening back to back to back. And, you know, depression was my biggest giant yet. But I want to go to David, the story of David and Goliath. 1 Samuel 17, if you want to write it down, verse 1 through 51. I do want to say the first verse that kind of stuck out to me, and, you know, my mom kind of brought to light as well. In that time, the Philistines were on one mountain, the Israelites were on the other mountain, and there was a valley between them. Sometimes our biggest battles are fought at our lowest places. They're fought in the valley. I wasn't at the mountaintop when I had to face my giant. I wasn't. I was at the lowest point of my life. And I think it's symbolic that David had to go into the valley to defeat Goliath. And I want to go into the tools that he needed to defeat this giant. It's kind of funny. Verse 38 through 40, it's talking about how they gave him this armor. They gave him this sword. And, you know, when David took a couple steps, he was like, nah. He was like, this isn't right. This doesn't fit. This isn't right. This isn't what I'm used to. And how many of you know you can't fight with armor that's not tailored to you? AKA the ways of the world. You can't fight. You can't. Sorry, mama. David didn't need a sword to face his giant because God gave him the basics. He had a slingshot. He went and he got his 5 stones. And this is the tools that were tested. This is what he knew. This is what, you know, God used because he was familiar with it. And you would think, how is this going to stop a big old giant from killing me? He's got this sword that's probably as big as my body, you know, and all I got is this stone. But how many of you know that God uses the basics to defeat the giants? He uses the Bible. He uses prayer. He uses worship. He uses fellowship with other Christians to defeat your giants. And that's all you need. That's what's tested. This is tested. These are our tested tools to get through what we need to get through and to experience that breakthrough and to defeat our giants. And so my basics were reading. My basics were worship. They were prayer. They were fellowship with other people. It wasn't comfortable. I didn't want to talk to people, but I did. I'm very grateful for my aunt as well. We just had a Bible study end a couple weeks ago, and that was really what I needed at that time. And it's funny because it's tailored towards the older women of the church. I'm 23. You know, I just graduated college. I don't have all the life experience that all these lovely women do and that most of you women do. I'm probably one of the youngest here. So I am honored to be able to speak, and hopefully I'm speaking into your life. But I'm very grateful for my aunt because I was at that Bible study on Thursday nights. And that's what I needed. And ironically, it was about faith. And I needed faith. I had lost my faith. I was depressed. I'd gotten so many no's that I wouldn't have even believed any yeses at that point because, you know, that was my mindset. But I had faith. And one of the things that I talked about was waiting faith. You know, when you're waiting, it's hard to stay strong. It's hard to be in the Word. It's hard to trust in what God has told you to do. But that is exactly what I needed to hear. And it's so crazy now because even with my PA school and not getting into school yet, there's so many things in the works right now. I don't even want to get into all of that, but just know that God has ordained people, even random strangers, and put people in your life to direct you in the path that you should go. And so I just know that when that door opens up, I'm just going to run right through. I'm going to get to be where I want to be. I'm going to be a PA. I'm going to make it through school. And it's not without the basics. The armor of the world can't defeat your enemies. And so verse 49 and 51, this is where he, struck down Goliath. And he had God on his side, so all he needed was the basics. All he needed was the tested tools that he was using, his slingshot, his stones. And it's crazy because some of you may know, but the backstory of why he got 5 stones instead of just 1 was because Goliath had 4 brothers. He didn't know if he was going to have to face any backup from Goliath in. So he picked 5 stones, but there's power in the 1 stone. 1 stone with God's favor can eliminate all of your giants. All it takes is 1 stone. Through prayer, reading, worship, the basics. It doesn't take much. It doesn't take much at all to face your giants, to defeat your giants. So all David needed was 1 stone to defeat the giants, to defeat the Philistine army, to keep the Israelites out of slavery. And God used him. Yes. And even through that, I want to get kind of back to my birth story. I was always marked for greatness. I was always marked for victory. And through struggling in my flesh, through struggling with depression and being at a very low point, I was always going to be victorious. And I really rely on my namesake and my birth story to remind me that it doesn't matter what comes your way, you're going to be victorious. It doesn't matter what your mom named you, God named you. You are victorious. You are ordained. You are called for such a time as this, and I'm so excited. I'm so grateful to be up here today because a couple months ago, there's no way I would have been up here. So even in mistakes, you are ordained by God. I mean, David was a murderer. He was an adulterer. He was polygamous. He loved his women. But he was still called. He was still a king in God's eyes. He was still able to defeat the giants. Even in sin, he was named king by God, and from his seed came Jesus. So that's even powerful in itself. So I just want to say there's no conviction where you have made mistakes. Even if you have operated in your flesh and appealed to your flesh in the past or even today or tomorrow, it doesn't matter. Like David, you are still called. You are still going to do great things in the eyes of God. And there's nothing that we can't do without him and the basics on our side. So no matter where you are, God is always with you. If you're on the mountaintop killing bears and lions, defeating giants, or if you're in the valley facing giants, not sure if that rock's going to hit, if it's going to defeat your enemy, God is with you. He's always with you. And I just thank you so much for hearing my heart today. I want to end in prayer. I hope that this message has touched you. I don't know if you've faced any of the giants that I've talked about or all of them, but I know that if God can get me through, he can get you through. So just thank you so much for letting me speak today. I'm going to end in a word of prayer. So thank you, God, so much for this opportunity to speak today. Thank you for giving me the words to speak. Thank you for letting this message resonate in the heart of all these women today. I just thank you for the opportunity to speak and to be up here, God. We are so blessed. We are so blessed to be in your presence, to be under your grace. We just thank you every day for your mercy that endureth forever, God. I just thank you for helping us to defeat the giants, God. Help us to get back to the basics. Help us to know what we need to do to face our giants, whether that's just reading every day or praying, God, or worshiping. We know that in you we can do all things. So I just thank you so much for all that you've given us. I thank you for blessing us as we go throughout the day today. I thank you for all the speakers here. I thank you for giving us wisdom and for giving us the words to speak, God. And I just thank you for all that you're doing in the lives of me and my family and all the women here. In Jesus' name, amen. I think we're going to segue into a video here too, so.